Whenever I review a Porsche on this channel, I usually end the video by saying, if you want the best ... then this is the car to buy. Well, this Porsche is a little bit different. This is probably the most unique Porsche to be sold by the company in the entire century. And on paper, its target customer base might be incredibly niche, but after getting to live with this thing for a little bit, I honestly think it might be for a lot more people than one would expect. This is the Porsche 911 Dakar, and it's essentially a modern interpretation of a 959 safari/rally car that Porsche built throughout the 80s for professional rally racing. But this is not just a lifted 911 with all-terrain tires and plastic fenders. This is taking not only components from the Turbo S, the GT3, and other Carrera models, but it's got a bespoke tune made just for this car for it to be able to do what it does. So this goes beyond what you would just call a parts bin special. So the base of this car is a 911 Carrera 4 GTS, the all-wheel drive version of the GTS, which most people would argue is the most amount of Porsche 911 you need on the street. The Turbo and Turbo S, those cars are fantastic in their own right, but they're so just absurdly fast in ways that you can't really take advantage of the speed on the street, at least legally. I think this is the right amount of power for me. You're looking at 473 horsepower and 420 pound-feet of torque, driven on all four wheels, like I said, via an 8-speed PDK. That's a dual-clutch transmission. No manual option for this car. But we'll get into all the performance, nitty-gritty stuff a little bit later. For now, let's focus on why this car looks the way it does. When looking at the Dakar, it's obviously a little bit higher up off the ground than a normal Carrera would be, and that's because of the suspension setup. We have a hydraulic lift system that, as standard, has this car sitting 2 inches higher than a normal Carrera would be, but because of the hydraulic system, you can raise it an additional 1.2 inches for off-roading purposes, but that's only one part to this story. We have a vented carbon fiber hood that's taken directly from the 911 GT3, which not only sheds some weight, but adds some aesthetic flair as well. And we also have a carbon fiber rear wing in the back, and it looks kind of similar to what you get on the 911 Turbo and Turbo S, but it is bespoke to this car. And then we've got these plastic fenders that go around the entire car, which make you feel a little less guilty about taking your 911 off-road. And then we've got a stainless steel skid plate up front and a stainless steel diffuser in the back for some added protection against rocks and whatnot. And then you have these red rescue hooks on the front and rear of the car in case you need to be saved in an off-roading situation, whether that be getting stuck in mud or sand or water maybe. And honestly, if you use this car to the point where you actually have to use this rescue hook, I applaud you, because that's what I call getting your money's worth. Between the armored side skirts and the skid plates, and the fenders and the hood and the rear wing in the back, this is a substantially looking Carrera. And you would think with all this extra stuff it'd be a lot heavier than a Carrera 4 GTS. Well, it's only heavier by about 30-ish pounds. So it's about 3,500-ish pounds total for this car, which is not too bad and still makes this lighter than a run-of-the-mill 911 Turbo S. So if you want a 911 that stands out more than any other model from the factory at least, the Dakar is the obvious choice. This car has gotten me more road attention than any other Porsche I've ever reviewed or driven, and that's including the race car for the road that is the GT4 RS. And if you want this car to stand out even more than it does now, because this is honestly a pretty bland spec for this car, there's even more stuff you can buy for this car that Porsche will sell you from the factory. That includes a roof rack, livery sticker sets, and a tent that you can put on top of this car that supports up to like 300-ish pounds. So you can literally live in your 911 Dakar. The interior experience of the Dakar is definitely a lot less special than what you get on the exterior. You've got like custom 911 Dakar floor mats and a plaque on the passenger side letting everyone in the world know that you're one of 2,500 people who are willing to drop this amount of money on a 911. But outside of that, there isn't much in this car that you can't get on a standard Carrera. But I guess one thing that is exclusive to this Carrera is a rear seat deletion that you cannot option back in, and that's because the rear area is being used to make room for more stuff that supports this car's off-road capability. As standard, you're getting a lot of interior items covered as race text, also known as Alcantara, but you can option a lot of trim items to be made in carbon fiber, just like any other 911. And speaking of carbon fiber, you're getting the carbon fiber bucket seats as standard in this car, but you can switch these out for the 18-way comfort seats at no cost. Personally, if I were getting the quirky off-roading 911, I would just go full rice and get the carbon buckets. I know these buckets are very hit or miss with a lot of people, but I personally find them to be pretty comfortable once you're in them. But for someone with a wider frame, getting in and out might be a little bit more than what you signed up for. Obviously, the 18-way seats have infinitely more adjustability, and if you're someone with back problems or something like that, then obviously that's a seat you would benefit a lot more by having. But if you want the bucket seat experience and you're willing to let go of the wide range of adjustability, then I say keep these. Don't go for the 18-ways, just because they're super supportive for spirited driving in a lot of different scenarios, but they also just look so sick. I just love the way these buckets look. If you want my more in-depth take on the overall experience of the 992 generation 911's interior, you should definitely check out my Carrera T review, where I get a little bit more nitty-gritty about the interior livability of this car. But other than that, this is more or less the same as many 911 Carrera models would be on the inside, depending on how you option them, which is not a bad thing, as long as you upgrade to the Bose or Burmester speaker system, because the base non-upgraded speaker system is dog water. And thankfully I have the Bose system here in this car, so the music listening experience has been good for me this time around. Now, before I dig into the driving experience of this car, there is one big asterisk. I was told that this car needs to be sold eventually, and so I was given specific instructions by Porsche to not off-road this car in any capacity, which, yes, I know. What's even the point of making a review on an off-roading 911 that you can't take off-road? Well, I think it's pretty obvious that if Porsche designed this car to go off-roading, it's probably going to be pretty decent at that at the very least. And there are videos you can watch online if you really want to know how well this car does in off-road situations. But I think it would actually be slightly more interesting to find out how all the modifications made to this car to make it a killer off-roader transforms the on-road experience and maybe enhances it a little bit. So let's dig into that. All right, let's give it a go with the launch control. We're on all-terrain tires. The weather's, 74 degrees right now, but it's pretty dry. I've seen Car and Driver do, I think, a 2.9 or a 3.0 on the dot with this car, so let's see what we can do. All right. I don't know what time we got, but I know that was probably pretty good. All right, we got a 3.25. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. 473. 3.25. That's pretty good. I'm happy with that number. Maybe we could try it one more time. All right. That felt basically the same. Wouldn't be surprised if I got maybe the exact same time. Ooh, 3.1. 3.1. 3.1. Okay. Man, that's pretty good. So, I mean, for reference, right? The last high-performance two-door coupe I had on this channel was the AMG GT63, which has about 100 more horsepower than this car, and I got nearly an identical 0 to 60 time, despite having less power, significantly less torque. I'm pretty impressed with that. At the end of the day, this is still a Porsche 911, right? So even if you lifted it off the ground by 2 inches and threw on all-terrain tires, it can still only be so much worse than a standard Carrera to drive. And yeah, after getting to live with this thing and really throw it around some back roads, it's still an incredibly balanced, just brilliant sports car to drive, just like the 911 has always been. And in some ways, it might be a bit more fun than a standard Carrera GTS. There's obviously been a lot of hardware changes made to this car to make it off-road capable, but the most noticeable aspect has definitely been with the tires. These all-terrain tires certainly alter the overall driving characteristics of the car that just make it feel a bit more rowdy. Surprisingly, the grip levels for accelerating from a standstill are pretty much unchanged from a standard Carrera, as I demonstrated earlier with the launch control. And because of the compound and the tread, the car just feels a lot more willing to slide. And when you do so, the tires squeal like a child on Christmas morning, making you feel like you're doing a lot more than you actually are, just because you're hearing a lot of that tire squeal. And honestly, the only real downside of having these all-terrains on the 911, as far as day-to-day driving, is just road noise. It's certainly a lot more loud on the freeway because of these tires. It's certainly not loud to the point of it being unbearable or unusable for me, but it's definitely a lot more noticeable than what you get in a standard GTS. But I don't think anyone opting for the Dakar is going to see that as a real negative when they are going for an off-roading 911. The suspension is honestly a lot more compliant than one would expect for an off-roading 911. The overall comfort and ride quality is honestly better than the street-oriented Carrera T that I reviewed last year on the channel. And because it isn't as stiff as a GT3 or a 911 ST, you can take this car over a lot of bad, uneven pavement, aka most of New Jersey, and still have a pretty comfortable ride. You are getting that road noise like I mentioned with the all-terrain tires, but the overall comfort of the ride is still a lot better than most of the 911 lineup, at least most of the more performance-oriented 911s. Something I thought I'd never be saying at a Porsche review of any kind is that the PDK in this car just feels slower than what I'm used to, at least what I experienced with the Carrera T, which in theory uses the exact same dual clutch gearbox as what I've got in this car. And honestly, this may be a result of the last Porsche that I drove being the GT4 RS, which uses a different iteration of the PDK that just shifts like absolute lightning. So this may be totally circumstantial to me exclusively, but I don't know, it just doesn't feel as responsive as what I remember. And that is not me saying that the PDK is slow in this car by any means, because it's still, you know, pretty much one of the best dual clutch automatics in the business. And for off-roading purposes, I think it's going to be more than enough, probably better than what you're going to experience in most cars like this, outside of maybe the Huracan Storado. But yeah, it just, I don't know, something feels like a little slower than what I remember, at least sometimes. But for spirited driving like what I'm doing now, it's absolutely sublime. Just not exactly what I remember, at least from the last Porsche I drove, which was the GT4 RS. It's hard to compare them, you know? Coming off the back of the Carrera T, I definitely appreciate the GTS powertrain in this car specifically. It's obviously faster than what you get in a base Carrera, but it also has just a bit more personality. So the GTS powertrain is using an upgraded turbo setup that increases boost pressure, and this car also has a tune that gives this car a lot more backfire and burbles on the overrun, and not too much burbles, but just the right amount of burble so that it doesn't feel like a ricer build, you know? And other than that, it's pretty much exactly what we've come to expect from a 3-liter flat six inside of a 911, but I definitely appreciate that added personality that we've got in this car because of it using the GTS powertrain. And because it's not using the upgraded turbo engine, which has a larger displacement, you still have that higher pitched sound at the red line that you don't quite get with the 911 Turbo and Turbo S. Honestly, the best part about driving this car outside of the power and the playfulness you've got with this setup is that you can drive it feeling nearly completely guilt-free. And what I mean by that is, my job with these cars given to me by the manufacturer is to do my absolute best to return it exactly as I found it. And so when you have this 911 that's super rugged and built for off-road use, it makes you feel a lot less guilty about doing spirited driving on the road. And so because you have the steel skid plates and the plastic fenders and whatnot, you just feel a lot less guilty about sending it on the road, because you're not going to be as worried about dealing with rock chips and scratches and whatnot, because it's designed to kind of take that. And so it's made it one of the more fun 911 or just Porsche driving experiences overall for me, just because I can drive it with a much more clear conscience and feel a lot less worried about, you know, little tiny like cosmetic issues that may occur because you're driving it a little hard on the street. And so yeah, this is still just the 911 we know and love at the end of the day. Sure, it's designed to go off-roading and to be really good at all that stuff, but when you drive it on the street, it's still just as fun as pretty much any other 911 that Porsche's come out with in the past handful of years. I've got the typical nitpicks with this car that I've got with pretty much every other 911, like when you're cruising on the freeway and get on the accelerator in a higher gear, you get this like humming noise. It's like that kind of just like unpleasant sound that just isn't that enjoyable to hear. But outside of that, man, this is still a brilliant sports car. Porsche is trying to sell this car to people who want to have the best possible experience with a 911 off-road, but I think it's simultaneously also really great for people who live in a climate like the Northeast and want to have fun in their 911 without feeling guilty about beating it up on not so forgiving roads. If you're a track demon who only cares about the best possible lap times and performance times on the track and on the street, then this car obviously isn't for you. But if you're not in that camp, well, I feel like this is still a lot of performance car for the street. Keep in mind, this is based on the GTS, which I feel like is pretty much peak 911 when it comes to actually being able to take advantage of the power on public roads. And you saw the numbers. This car does a 0 to 60 faster than a lot of electric cars. So it's still a very capable car on the street, despite all the modifications done to make it a killer off-roader. It's funny because the term beater car means a car that you essentially buy for cheap and kind of just beat the crap out of without really caring about its well-being too much. And these Dakars are going for well over 300 grand on the used market, but subsequently, because of all the mods done to make this a killer off-roader, it's also the perfect beater 911. You just have to spend as much as a Turbo S to have that experience. But if that's something you're looking for and are willing to drop that amount of money, then this is the best 911 to buy right now. I honestly don't think too many of the 992 generation model 911s are going to have that big of a lasting impact on automotive history, but this one will. But that's about it for this video. If you enjoyed, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for future content like this. Also, if you want to support the channel, we have merch on the website, carswithmiles.com. This is just one of a few designs we've got on there right now. And yeah, that's about it for this one. Gonna go off-roading. Well, actually, no, I'm not, because I'm not allowed to.